Hi, I'm Dave, founder of Halloween Year Round. I'm joined by my friend Patrick.
Howdy, everyone.
And welcome to our second weekly Dead Talk. I hope you guys are enjoying these. Like I said, if you ever want to be on it, or if you ever have like a topic you'd like us to talk about, leave a comment. Today, we're talking about, there's a new Shudder documentary out, Boris Karloff, Man Behind the Monster. So we're going to talk a little bit about that documentary and kind of just Boris Karloff in general. Before we get started, though, as always, I kind of like to go over just what's in the news in the horror world. So biggest stories this week. We got a new trailer for the new Texas Chainsaw Massacre coming out on Monday. So very excited for that one. We're definitely doing a whole episode devoted to that movie when it comes out. Halloween Ends has just started production in Georgia, as was confirmed by Jamie Lee Curtis in a picture she posted on Twitter. Very curious and excited to see how, nothing can kill the guy, so we'll see what they do in this one. And fans of our video last week who loved Guillermo del Toro, I could not bring this up. Ron Perlman is up for doing Hellboy 3 with Del Toro. Please make this happen, Hollywood.
Yes, please. Seriously, I'm a big fan of Hellboy.
Do it. Perlman is 71 years old. He says he doesn't want to do another one, but he says they owe it to the fans to do another one, and he is up for it. The man is a legend and a hero. And speaking of legend and heroes, Patrick, I think you can start taking away about who we're talking about today.
Rightio then. So today we're going to be talking about the man, the myth, the legend, the legendary Mr. Boris Karloff, one of the most premiered Hollywood actors of his time during the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. A legend for being the original Frankenstein,
the Mummy, which I've always actually preferred his performance in The Mummy. That might be my own bias as like a fan of ancient history, that The Mummy was always kind of like my favorite of those original monsters.
Mm-hmm. It's funny, like I've been getting into the Mummy series. Like, I saw the 99 film with Brendan Fraser, and I started going back to watching the original with Boris Karloff, and he's incredible. Absolutely an incredible performance.
There's a subtlety to it that I feel like in Frankenstein, he does a great job of humanizing a monster and making
Yes.
I mean, you want to get technical. I know everyone calls him Frankenstein. He's actually Frankenstein's monster. And people have said this before. Dr. Frankenstein is the true monster of that story.
Yeah, a man who literally wishes to play God by restitching, inanimate pieces of people and trying to bring life to it. It is incredible and was definitely controversial for its time, especially with Mary Shelley's original novel, which which caused quite a stir, like in the literary community, and then later on with Universal getting the rights to publishing that story.
In a lot of ways, is that the first true horror novel? It might be.
It's definitely up there. I mean, in terms of like actual novels.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, of course, like there's other various myths and legends that go back like thousands of years.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, in terms of actual like literary, yeah, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, I think, would be one of the very earliest ones. And of course, Bram Stoker's Dracula,
But even that was decades later. And speaking of, so yes. Both of those characters, their performances by Lugosi and our subject Boris Karloff were so iconic that even to this day, when people think of Frankenstein's monster, it's the Boris Karloff version they're thinking of.
Yes,
that's the one that you automatically go back to. There have been other adaptations. Yeah, Robert De Niro played him with a very out of place New York accent, but none could come close to Karloff. And this documentary on Shudder, I just watched it, this past week. really fascinating. I did not know a whole lot about him. I think you probably were a bit more well versed in his films and his roles. I was just fascinated to kind of learn his personal story, his life, and that, despite playing these creatures and doing these horror movies, he seems to like he was the nicest, most gentlemanly person in the world.
Oh, absolutely. And I'll be honest too, like especially after watching the documentary as well, like I actually learned some newer things about him that I wasn't quite aware of. For example, his early involvement with creating the Screen Actors Guild. I did not know that. In all honesty, I did not know
Neither did I.
he was one of the original founders for that. And as a- and I al- as a- and also, but yeah, it's also true too. Like how kind and gentle he was, and how and how loving of a father he was to his own as a daughter. Who I have to say, like really, like it brought a tear or two to your eye. Just like how revered she spoke of as a him, and
and and
and her
and
life
and
story.
not just that, but how the fans kind of keep that alive and what
Yes,
it means to her, and that
yes,
she's
absolutely.
had nothing to do. She was not in these movies, but how fans revere her just because of her connection to him, and it's like she's a piece of him, that lives on.
Absolutely. And that's what really touched me, especially when she said, it's thanks to the fans who keep his memory alive, and that she was like eternally grateful for the fans who, bring that. I love that, and that shows like the positivity of what a fandom can bring, especially to, like, you know, Boris Karloff, and keeping his memory alive with all the other
Hmm.
various roles like he's done. I mean, even like beyond like horror too, when they is it with some of his more serious roles like Targets, for example, like how meticulous he was and how dedicated he was to his own performance, including like one of his final performances with Vincent Price on stage with the Red Skeleton Show, where like he's
I
literally in a
I
chair.
saw, yeah, and
Yeah,
he
but
just, the
he
minute
just
they called action, he dropped it. Like he was in pain. But the show must go on. He was a
yes,
professional, and
yes, absolutely.
I like your point about the positivity of fandom. I think too often we hear about toxic fandom, and I think it's just because you only hear about the bad stuff in anything.
Hmm.
It's the
Yeah.
bad stuff that gets that gets the attention. It's the bad stuff that tends to be the loudest. But as someone who's been to these horror conventions, I will say, and I will defend this, horror fans, there are definitely, yes, there's toxicity in anywhere. There's crazy people, but horror fans are so, in general, are some of the least toxic fans I've seen. Like compared to the Star Wars fandom that's always in a civil war with itself.
Yeah, I mean, you're always gonna like have like a few bad as apples, and some who just definitely push it to an extreme, but which is sad. I mean,
It
there's always
is.
look, like I'm a Star Wars fan myself. Like, I may not be 100% crazy about like what's been going on with certain Star Wars shows, and I may as a, and of course I'll always give my 2 cents for that. But like
Mm-hmm.
for example, like I really like The Mandalorian. I think that's definitely been one of my favorite shows of Star Wars. But back on topic though, especially when it comes to like the positivity is in a fandom, definitely horror fans. I've seen that myself. Like I've been to various conventions like Amazicon, for example, where it celebrates like older properties, older films
Mm-hmm.
and TV shows. And I always see like some amazing like horror booths in there, celebrating like the universal monster classics of Frankenstein, Dracula, the Mummy, the Wolfman, the Creature from the Black Lagoon. And you can just feel that love and passion. Like that's what I love, like when it comes to a good community, and you
They're
see feel that
they're
way.
they're the nicest fans ever. And even just,
Yes.
I've been in Facebook groups, and the horror ones are the ones that I see that in. And I've often wondered, I have two theories. One, that
Mhm.
horror was always kind of seen as the lesser genre, like, oh, that's just
Right.
horror. It was always looked down on. And I
Yeah.
think horror fans always felt like there was kind of an underdog quality to them. And also, this is me getting into psychoanalysis, which, disclaimer, I am not an expert in. I just pretend to be. But I have a feeling that horror fans almost, like, we all have these negative feelings in us. We all have the potential for negativity.
Hmm.
And I think almost it's like horror fans purge those feelings with the
Yes.
horror that they watch. So then in
Yes.
their regular lives, all that's left is the good. And it's like the people who say they don't like horror, that darkness in them comes out in their personal life.
Yes.
That is just my personal theory that I would love someone to do a psychological study about. I'd be very curious to read that.
Oh yeah,
So
absolutely.
if anyone watching is a psychologist, there's do that study.
Hmm.
But back to
But yeah, back on.
Karloff,
Oh
I
yes.
was I was fascinated. So we fans really only see, like, most people only know him as Frankenstein, and I think it's kind of amazing that, firstly, he wasn't even invited to the premiere because no one thought to invite him.
Yeah, which was very surprising, but sadly also like, like a style of like a trend of the time, if the times, if you know what I mean. You
It
know.
was, and it's just interesting to see how he goes from that to only a couple years later he's an A-lister, and just what that when the movie premiered, the public hadn't seen it yet, but then once the public saw it, it's like he got that recognition that he deserved. And
Yes.
I was so happy to see that, and that he was always able to do those projects, that he was free to, you know, horror fans tend to only see, oh, he's just Frankenstein, but there's more to him than that. Like, he loved doing theater, he loved doing drama.
Yes, absolutely.
He was a thespian through and through.
Oh, very much so, especially when he emigrated to Canada, and when he was trying to get into acting while also doing some of the various like logging jobs.
Hmm.
It was incredible to see, like, like how even with no theater training whatsoever, like he was able to like convince them to, like, give him a chance, and he just flourished, and it was incredible. Like, I had never seen anything quite like that. Like, it's such a rare kind of story in this day and age, but like, that was kind of the thing. Like, he
he
had to put
he just
himself out there.
he had the talent. And I have a theory that he was, now, so in the documentary they talk about his family and how his brothers and his father were involved in, like, government and
Yes.
politics.
Yeah, yeah, and how he was supposed to follow in their
He was
footsteps.
supposed to do that, and ironically, he's the one whose name we all remember for it, not the
Right.
statesman. You know what I mean? I'm
Right.
sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure they did important things, but none of them reached that status that Boris did. And
Mhm.
it's interesting that they almost looked down on him for it.
Right.
But I have a theory that maybe being good at performances just ran in the family, because you think about it, being a politician, being a statesman does require some level of showmanship and improvising. And these are skills that
And communications as
also,
well.
and exactly.
Hmm.
And I think that there's definitely an overlap, and that it's interesting that they flourished in that field, and he took those same skills and applied it to acting, and look what it did.
Absolutely. And also like going back to Frankenstein too, how he was also like, a very humble man too, especially like, praising is it Jack Pierce for the create is it for the doing the makeup work, because it was just layers and layers of makeup in order
Oh
to,
yeah.
do that. And he really had to convey that physical performance in is it like in doing Frankenstein, because you have to is it because sort is it for all you out there who, like, is it who weren't born in the 30s or even like, further before that. Like
I don't think anyone's watching this who was born in
yeah,
the 30s.
yeah. I know. I'm kind
They
of
don't know what YouTube is.
right, exactly. Yeah, but I mean, I'm just saying for like to younger generations and what is it
Mhm.
whatnot. That's what I mean. For younger generations out there, there were no computers. There was like computer technology was like non-existent. So
Oh yeah,
what you
it's
what
all
you
practical.
right, exactly. So what you see with Carlos' performance of Frankenstein, that's real. That's all physical makeup that's on his face that he then had to exude in the performance of when he like when he would speak, when he would try to communicate, like
Hmm.
how frightened he was, how confused he was, how scared he would be, how angry he could be. All of that you can just feel through that, and that's where Karloff truly shined. And that's
He,
once again like showing true performance and as in craftsmanship of the
he
actor
he
performance.
definitely he used his physicality and his very kind of towering, stature to his advantage in that. The
Yes.
kind of awkward movements. But I think it's interesting. I believe everything's connected. This is a man who, it's no surprise that he praised Jack Pierce and gave him recognition. I mean, think about it. Before Tom Savini, when did makeup artists get recognition in
Yeah,
horror
true.
movies? Savini was kind of the first, and I'm glad that we know his name. We know Rick Baker. We know
Yes.
Stan Winston. But
Hmm.
before Savini, that wasn't really a thing, and
Right.
he was giving him that recognition decades
Yeah.
before, and I think it ties into that. This is the same man who was one of the founding members of the Screen Actors Guild. He was someone
Yes.
who he was very tall, but he cared about the little guy, and he didn't have to because he was an A-lister. He risked his own career by being viewed as a problematic, unionist, basically. But he did it to improve what was at the time a real stranglehold that studios had on their stars.
Yeah, that is very true. And especially in the documentary, they clearly stated that these actors would have to work such long and arduous hours to as a point where I like I mean like even several times like Karloff himself would like like fall over like
Oh yeah.
exhausted, like either as Frankenstein or especially as the mummy, as he was fully wrapped up in those bandages, like it was like just arduous.
They'd work him to death. And I think people take for granted now how easy it is for actors to hop from doing a Universal movie and then go do a Disney movie and then over
Right.
to Paramount, and how back then that really wasn't as much a thing because they really were tied down with these contracts, and that
Yes.
every actor today kind of has him to thank. I know I read a tidbit. I don't believe this was in the documentary, but I read a tidbit about it that he
Hmm.
used to carry coins because whenever he was going to make a phone call about the Screen Actors Guild, he had to use pay phones because he was worried that the studios had bugged his home phone, which
Interesting.
definitely they would have done back then. I mean,
Yeah,
it was a different world, but just
very
I
much
I
so.
I admire that in him. That we would have just loved him as the actor and the performer. It's like he didn't have to be that cool a person too, and
Hmm.
I'm so glad that he was.
Yeah, and I do admire the fact that he also did have that way as a way about him that he did as a care like that. Vincent Price was also very similar to that as well, especially with
Mm-hmm.
the American arts exhibitions that he would help to promote, which of course back then was like like really an actor like promoting like like Native American arts, and it's like yeah, that's what he was about. Like he cared about that. He was a huge art collector. So
Really, I never knew that.
yes, very yeah. Vincent Price was a huge art collector. He was a very a big fan of cooking. He loved to cook, And I mean, like we'll get more. Is it like this will all be? Is it? I'll get way more into that because like I absolutely love Vincent Price, and I'll definitely get more into that in a
We
future topic.
we are definitely devoting a whole episode. I'm getting you on record talking about Vincent Price because I know you.
Yes.
That may have to be like a double one or like a
Yes.
two-parter one or something. Because
Yes. Absolutely.
I know, to everyone watching, ever since we met, we met in college over a decade ago.
Yep.
Patrick is the biggest Vincent Price fan I've ever met. And half of what I know about Vincent Price, I learned from Patrick.
I'm honored, Dave. I mean that. Thank you.
And
Thank you.
you're welcome. I say it as a horror fan. I should know more about.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You should. I mean, he's incredible. I mean, like he did a. I mean, like I said, Vincent Price did a lot of different, like things and different varieties. Like he wasn't just like for horror. Like he also would do, more serious roles. He started like early on, like in film noirs. Like that's like how
Mm-hmm.
he initially got discovered. And like I said, I'll definitely go more into that as well. But yeah,
But
I definitely know that stuff.
speaking, you do. Speaking of
Yes.
Price, let's talk a little bit of. I know there was some collaboration between him and
Yes.
Boris Karloff that I know you really wanted.
Yeah.
So if we're talking favorite Boris Karloff movies, I know it's cliche. I got to go with The Mummy, just because that's one of my favorites. But yours, I believe, is The Raven.
Well, is it? Well, I mean, let me like
Get into it.
so
Get
yeah,
into
yeah,
it.
I was just gonna say, well, first off, let me just say right now, like if you ask me what was one of my favorite Boris Karloff, you know, like Universal monster movies, it would have to be Frankenstein. Like that's just such an iconic role, and one that even Guillermo del Toro cites as the reason that he got into filmmaking. Like that's how powerful that the Frankenstein
I
film is.
loved seeing him in that documentary. I loved that they got Christopher Plummer in there. They
Yes,
they had Dick Miller in there, in which I
yes,
believe was his final performance in anything because he
I
passed
believe it.
away
Yes,
right
yes.
after they
Is it?
shot
Is
that.
it? And John, I believe John Landis also had some
Yes.
star, and Joe Dante. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
both directors I love, especially An American Werewolf in London. And of course, John is a Joe Dante, like Gremlins. Like, need I say more? I love
It's
that film.
they're
It's
all
so much fun.
classics. So
Yes.
if your favorite Universal monster movie he did was Frankenstein, what's your favorite performance by Boris Karloff?
That's a good. That is a good one. See, like you asked me about like the whole thing with Vincent Price. Like, I mean, I'll be honest in terms of I mean, there's definitely a lot more Boris Karloff films I would definitely like to check out is it I mean like for example, like there were some in the documentary that I definitely want to check out, especially
Mm-hmm.
Black Sabbath and the Black Cat
Same.
from 1934. Like those, I mean, like those were ones that I definitely want to check out now because of that. I mean, I know enough about Boris Karloff to like give a talk about him, but in terms of like I haven't seen every single movie he's ever is a bit in.
Fair
But
enough.
yeah,
I like your honest answer. I
yes,
like that you
thank
didn't
you.
try to trick us. Oh, it's this one because I've seen them all. I appreciate your
Thank,
candor.
thank you. Thank you very much. And like I said,
He's
at
more
least
honest than me. I'm the Slytherin.
so but yeah, like in terms of what I have seen Boris Karloff in, like I would definitely say Frankenstein would be my personal favorite.
Mm-hmm.
However, though I definitely would after seeing the documentary, I definitely want to watch more films with Boris Karloff in it, like the Criminal Code,
Mm-hmm.
Black Sabbath, the Black Cat, Targets, and several others. But now but I can at least say in terms of Vincent Price um uh films that he was in, because this would be like near the end of his film acting career when Vincent Price's star was rising significantly.
It definitely, Karloff was before him, kind of, and then Price is kind of
Yeah,
starting. So there,
yes,
that's when you
yeah.
get that
So
overlap.
which is really cool because you can see that and see how very different and unique both are. So
Mm-hmm.
in preparation for this, I actually watched The Raven and the comedy of Terrors, both having Boris Karloff in a supporting role alongside Vincent Price. And I have to say, I definitely loved as a Raven. It's an extremely loose adaptation of the titular story from Edgar Allan Poe.
It's a
Uh,
very short poem. I wonder
yes,
how do they stretch that out to a
that
whole movie?
I can answer this one since I've seen it.
Okay.
So so the poem gets so the story is a bit elongated. It gets quite elongated as it shows Vincent Price's character as the son of a world, I mean, of a famous magician,
Okay.
and he is and he is visited by a raven in the night, who happens to be Peter Lorre, who's part of a fraternity of the Brotherhood of Magicians, and he was turned into a raven by Boris Karloff's as a character of trying to remember, it was as a Doctor I have to just look this one up very quick, but I can pull it up. But it did
This
become
break is brought to you by Google.
let's see, it would be Dr. Scarabus. Yes, is a Dr.
Very
Scarabus.
cool name.
Yes. Oh, very cool. Is a very dark, is a dark name. So Lori asks Price to help confront him as as Scarabus had taken away his various books and equipment that he needed to
Mhm.
continue practicing magic. So so Price with Lori, um, Vincent Price's daughter is a daughter in the is a film. Um, who's played by Hazel Court. Or actually, wait, no, I'm sorry, not Hazel Court. My bad. Uh, Olivia Sturgis, or is it Olive Sturgis, and they all have to go to the castle. Now, interestingly enough, too, Jack Nicholson has a very early appearance as one of his like earlier movie roles. Like he plays he plays Laurie's son in the film. So
Well, that's the one that they shot with Karloff and Nicholson, and then they picked up again. Like how much time later? Because
yeah.
Corman was like, if he had 2 days left over, he was going to try to shoot an entire new movie in those 2 days.
Oh yeah, and that's actually and you know what? Funny thing you mentioned that, because they even mentioned that in the documentary as well, that he used some of that time to do The Terror, in which like when it got respliced in later on, it's like several different movies just cobbled together. It's very funny.
So does it play out like does it feel like almost what was it, the Joss Whedon Justice League, where it feels like multiple movies stitched together, or
Well,
does
for
it
the
work?
well, I have not seen The Terror myself, so I cannot say.
Okay.
But for the Raven though, if it was cobbled together for like is it for like the two is like for the 2 or 3 days that Karloff was on, like I didn't feel like it was really out of place. Like it still felt like everything was it still felt that everything was flowing smoothly. I mean, even the part where Karloff is like walking down the stairs, because you have to remember during that time he's already very, he's getting up in his age, so like it was difficult for him as he had
He I
various like
think he
back
had
problems
a leg brace
yeah,
too.
yes, yes, and a leg brace. That's right. So what happened was they had to cut away from him walking like 3 steps down, cutting back to Price and Nicholson and the rest of the cast and Laurie and the rest of the cast down, just looking as he's descending, and then you cut back to him doing the last 3 steps,
Okay.
and but he never complained once. Like he was still able to
Not the
do what he
type of
did.
guy to do it.
Right. But I have to say though, at the very end of the film, like seeing the wizards as it like the magician's duel between both of them, between Price and Karloff, is just priceless. It's incredible, and I wish they had a little extra money in the budget to do some like really cool things. Like for example, like it was kind of funny, like some of the stone like demons, like they're kind of just being pushed toward the camera, and I'm thinking like it's a shame they couldn't have like had like Ray Harryhausen kind of do like a little like claymation to kind of like make them come to life, and then you do a cut, then you do a
But
jump
they
cut.
they they ran out of money.
Yeah, is it? Well, I mean, these things were filmed very cheaply, but people
Mhm.
loved them back in the day. So just like for example, the Comedy of Terrors, like even like Vincent Price, like on the as part of a documentary I saw when I was watching it, even stated that at the time Mutiny on the Bounty was playing in one theater house, but there weren't really a lot of people in there. But for the Comedy of Terrors, that place was packed because people loved seeing Price and Karloff like on screen. And well, while the Raven's more of a as a comedy horror, like like it has like a decent balance between the two, especially
Mhm.
of its time in 1963. Comedy of Terrors is definitely a lot more comedy than as a horror, but then again, it
Well,
also
with
has
with
the
a
whole.
title like that,
Yeah, right,
you
exactly.
you
But
I,
then
I'd be surprised if it was the other way around. I would be very surprised, but
yeah, yeah, and Karloff in that one plays the father of the daughter that Price marries, and Price is a real piece of work in that movie. Like he's basically just dissing her, like saying, "Oh, you are such a horrible singer, like
oh
you'll
my
never like
god.
become." Oh, it's. I'm not gonna lie, like it like. Price could definitely turn on like the nastiness, like at the drop of a hat, and he could, and you feel that as I feel that throughout some of his performances, like you know but it's weird, like like he could be very nasty, he could portray his character as nasty, but then when the cameras were off, he was just the same sweet wonderful guy as a and classy guy he always was.
They
Because
they they were certainly in a class together, as
absolutely,
types
as
of people. So
absolutely,
to start to wrap things up, any
yep.
final thoughts on just like the documentary or Boris Karloff in general?
Well, for me personally, I really loved the documentary. I really enjoyed it. It was very informative. I learned a lot more about Boris Karloff, than I previously had, and I have to say that it was very well done, very well shot. I learned quite a bit about him, and if anything, I have even more respect for him as
Mm-hmm.
as an actor, especially afterwards, and just seeing like all the warmth and the positive, and that positive, you know, storytelling of it. Really, like I hope that introduces like a whole new generation to Boris Karloff, and like I said, oh, and also I loved how they touched on his voice work for in How the Grinch Stole Christmas, and that's
That's
one
the
that
that's the
that's
other thing is that like he's part of this great. He's like this huge horror icon, but he's also the Grinch.
yes, he's the narrator and the voice of the Grinch, and it's incredible. And you can see it like when Chuck Jones, the way he animated the Grinch, the features of Karloff are clearly in the Grinch's face if you look very
Oh,
closely. Like
definitely.
like the brow as a brow and the chiseled feet as a features. You can definitely feel that, and that's what was incredible about this documentary. They touched on every piece of Karloff's life, from his
Mm-hmm.
earlier days growing up in England, to his later years, like like being with as a Price and Roger Corman, and of course like the final projects he worked on, including Thriller, which I definitely want to check out, like a very interesting TV series that basically was like, as they even admitted, like was a ripoff of the Twilight Zone at the time, but it still has like excellent episodes,
It,
including its
it, it
like one of its
worked.
final ones. Yes.
It worked. So
So
definitely check out the documentary. For those interested, on February 1st, Shudder is releasing a collection. They're going to add some Boris Karloff titles as part of the collection. I have them right here. They're adding Black Cat, Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, House of Frankenstein, The Mummy, Son of Frankenstein, along with The Old Dark House and Black Sabbath, are all going to be available on Shudder February 1st as kind of a tie-in to this documentary, which is out now. So check out the documentary. Check out some of those movies. A lot
absolutely.
of these older movies, they deserve the attention, and it's cool to see sort of the foundations of modern horror and like how it started back here. So I
Absolutely.
can't recommend them enough. Also, while you're doing that, like,
Mhm.
share, subscribe. If you don't, you may end up being turned into a raven by a magician.
Or is it, or is it, or is it, or be is it chased into a is it burning windmill by, is it by angry mob of villagers?
Well, I mean, yeah, I dodge that every other week. So, we will be back next week for shall we say, it will be February. So it will be a Valentine's themed episode, and things might get bloody. And that's all I'll say. So
Hmm. Yep.
until we see you again, my name is Dave. And, like, share, subscribe, check us out on social media. And of course, as always, every day is Halloween.
And from me, Patrick, in the immortal words of Bob Wilkins, watch horror films and keep America strong.